start recording. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, what happens here with your model is the model is turned from this visual entity with events, etc., into Java code. We saw how that goes. And then that Java code is turned into what's called JVM bytecode, which is basically runnable code. Code that so-called Java Virtual Machine, or JVM, can run on whatever platform. So you could send that to one machine, send it to another, etc. Okay? Now, the magic of this process takes place when you press the build button up here, and you can build your project or many projects at once. I believe that functionality is still there. That will test how much it understands your model, as well as try to turn it into something fully runnable. Okay. Alternatively, you can build through the context menu associated with the model itself, or you can do model builds from up here. Okay. Now, we talked earlier about how sometimes there's this problems window that comes up, and that reports to you cases where it's confused about what's going on in the model. Okay, it doesn't understand what you're trying to say in the model. It's as if you're not speaking grammatical language. It can't spot all errors. After all, your model could have a logical reasoning bug, and it's not going to be able to figure that out. However, if your model seems ungrammatical to it, it will alert you to that. It will say, I have no idea what you mean. For example, if there's a hanging transition in a state chart that goes nowhere, it just goes off into empty space, it's going to complain down here in the problems window. If you refer to a variable that it can't find in the model, it's going to say, hey, I can't find that. Okay? If you try to call a function like uniform and you don't provide the right parameters for it to do its job, it will complain in this. If you passed it a string or something, it'll say, I don't know what to do with that. And it will tell you in this problems window. Okay? If you have a build that goes good, then you get this bytecode and it can then run. And here it's running on an ongoing basis. And here, we have an agent class like person, but there'll be many particular examples of people. We say instances of that class which are now in existence. And each of these persons will have an individual state, and the populations will be changing, and those individuals will be evolving. Okay. Talked about saving. I'm not going to distinguish this. Okay. So when we're working with these models, we distinguish between what we're doing when we design the model, we characterize it, we specify it, versus when we run it. Those are kind of two different times. We talk about design or specification time and execution or run time. Okay? And generally speaking, a given element in our model, let's suppose here in main, so I'll close this, we consider this event. This event has a representation here within main that's visual, so we can interact with it, we can set its properties and so on. But it will also have a representation when we're running the model to do something. And this event might be turned into an actual object, or it might be turned into a specific bits of code within the model. Persons are actually turned into an object. An event might be turned into a set of functions in the model rather than necessarily being represented as a separate event. You can see there's an event rate. That's a sort of type. But some things in AnyLogic at build time or when you specify the model are actually turned into objects when you run the model, and others just turn into code that's captured. And with events, I believe it just turns into, I'd have to look here, but I believe it turns into just little bits of code here, okay, rather than a reified object, something that it turns into. But a person here, a person will turn into one or more instances of person. So this person here turns into it represents what's called a class, a set of sort of possible people. It represents personhood, and then that can be represented with many particular instances of that class. And we'll be talking about that some probably tomorrow. Classes and instances of the class. Okay. Right. I don't think I need to dwell on this. Okay. Tips to bear in mind when you're writing code. Often there'll be a light bulb which is shown for certain fields. Examples were that on click. So when we had that on click, for example, which was associated with this, we could have one for shape body, I think. There may be an on click here. And when we click in here, there's this little light bulb here. There's another light bulb up here, for example. These will give you tips. And often they tell you the names of available resources that you can use. For example, this tells you that at this location, there's a couple of variables defined you can refer to directly, like click X, click Y. Those will actually tell you where the person has clicked relative to this particular agent, relative to kind of this origin here, okay? And it can give you some additional information here. Similarly, when you have receive a message, it may tell you, oh, you can get this information about the message or what have you. So these light bulbs are going to be quite helpful when writing these little snippets of code that you're talking about. Even things like out here in population, when we go to population and we do this, we see these little things here, and it will tell us, hey, there's this thing called self. Remember I said you could ask self, like, what's my age? Or what's my birth time? And use that to specify my location, for example. So it's telling you, hey, there's something called self available, and there's another thing called index, which is sort of, is this person 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 in the population? So we might have, for example, the first half of the population be associated with a high income, and the second half with a low income. And so we test their index. Is it less than 250 out of a 500-person population? If so, they're high income, otherwise they're low income. So these tell you, these little light bulbs tell you what it provides you, so when you write your code, you can use it. And you may remember a very important instance was here. It told us, hey, there's this thing called item. Okay? These are really useful to know what information I can get automatically from it. And that prevents us from having to look directly at this code. But if you really want to do so, particularly if you have recourse to someone who knows a little bit more Java, occasionally you may want to do Control-J here, and it will go show you where this is, and you'll notice there's this thing called self here. That's referring to the person. It didn't give much explanation of what self was, but we say, oh, it's a person here. It's a person. And there's also an index thing here, and I could make use of it in my code. Okay? So occasionally we may peek into there just to see what the names of things are. It might provide a little bit more information than it provided for you automatically when we simply clicked here and it say, oh, there's a thing called self. It doesn't say what that is, but by looking at a bit of the code, we can say, oh, it's a person. Oh, that's probably the person being initialized, something along those lines. And in fact, I didn't look at the code closely, but if we were to go see this, you notice that what's happening is it's determining its X location, its Y location. The X location is being determined by this, the Y location by this, the Z location is being set to 0, and then it's setting the XYZ position for that person self here. See that? So that's what's going on behind the scenes. Similarly, up at the birth time, there's some information. So using these little hints is useful, these little light bulbs, but sometimes more fully explicating them is particularly useful, so that I know what's available here for use. For example, it doesn't tell you there's a self that I can use here. It doesn't say, hey, you could refer to, like in that model yesterday, self.sex to determine the income. I happen to know it is there, and one way you could kind of poke around here is by going and looking at this code here, and come on, show me the code. Okay, it's not showing me the code. Why isn't it? I'll put 0 here. Maybe it's because there ain't any code to show right now. There we go. And here, there's a self. I know this is self. I can see it right there. I can use self.sex. That may have been how I figured that out. It didn't tell me, but I went and saw, oh, there's a self there. That's the thing that's being initialized here. So, I remember a grizzled old professor at MIT told me one time, he said, as we get older, we don't get any smarter, but we kind of get more sly. And I get a little bit sly sometimes and go and peer and sort of, okay, there's a self there. But you got to be cautious because you can't count on this, but they just didn't document it well. And so sometimes poking around, if you're not afraid to see this, can be useful. Okay? But most of the time, these little light bulbs tell you hints that are useful, like the names of the variables that are available. Okay. Now we've seen that autocompletion is our friend. At least I hope it's your friend as well, and not merely your enemy. But when we autocomplete, it kind of looks, what could you say here that starts with those key letters? That doesn't mean everything is legal. It's trying to fill out what you've typed. Okay? Java is case sensitive. What this means is that if you spell something as uppercase and lowercase, it's very different. There are times where it bends over backwards to give you a bit of choice. An example is color names. You can specify it all capital case or all lowercase, but you can't mix them indiscriminately. It's either all one or all the other. But you should realize it is case sensitive. So if I said, for example, uniform here, and I said, instead of, so we'll build this. We'll make sure it's a happy camper. It's a happy camper. Build completed successfully. It thinks it knows what we're telling it. It understands our grammar. It doesn't mean what we've told it is meaningful. It doesn't mean what we've told it is exactly what we intended to tell it, but it understands our grammar. And now, suppose I were to go and change this. Instead of being a lowercase u, make it an uppercase. Do you think it would be happy? No. In fact, it will be downright unpleasant. It would, see, it says I can't find something called uniform. It's very picky. Sometimes we use that to our advantage. Maybe we have a transition called death, and we have a final state called death at a capital D, a transition with a lowercase. We're not being very careful how we name those things, but they don't clash. They don't get confused with each other in terms of it thinking they're the same thing. Here, though, we need to use the right capitalization for it to be happy. Fortunately, in this problems window, most of the time it will bring us directly to these things. I'd like to show you something shocking, though. I'm going to attempt to enrage, so to speak, the Java beast here. Okay? I'm going to attempt to upset it so that it gets really confused. And I'm going to show you what results. It may be eye-opening. Okay, I'm going to do some weird things here. Okay? Okay, let's try this. Let's suppose that I were to put in here some really funky characters. I'm going to try an @ sign here. Okay? Let's try that. That isn't too funky, but let's just see what. Okay, you notice it says something kind of interesting. It says I form can't be found. It says it has problems. Now if I double click on this, it tries to bring me to that place, but it's not quite right. It has trouble bringing me to that place. Or if I click here, then it's actually a bit better bringing me to the place. So sometimes it's imperfect about bringing me. Here too it can't find it. I'm going to try to make it even more confused. Let's try putting in place a, let's see, what would really, watch this. You ready? End curly. Okay, watch this. Watch this. This may cause it to engage in real upset. Okay, it lost it. It's going the computational equivalent of bonkers. Notice this one little thing, this one little stinking end curly turns into a whole sequence of errors here. That doesn't mean there's many errors. Don't be scared by something like that. There may be one error, but it's just getting it so confused that it's engaging in wig outs.
Is there a general rule on whether it's better to start clicking at the top of the list or the bottom of the list when you're kind of working through those errors? So I'll start from
Top. Top will often be the first it encountered, and what often happens is you get cascading errors. This is a great question. So the first one is probably closer to the source of the issue. And if you go to the later ones, they probably get increasingly less relevant. It's just knock-on effects, where like 20 lines down, 100 lines down, 1,000 lines down, it's still confused. And it still doesn't know what's going on. So you notice it's expressing displeasure. Let's go see how confused it really is. Obviously, it's freaking out here in many ways. I'm going to double click on this. Let's see if, the fox has shown its tail. Do you see what happened? Where has it put us? Did it put us very nicely back in the properties? No, it stuck us. It said, I don't know what's going on at this point in the Java code. And you might say, well, what does this Java code have to do with anything that I've told it about? It's all confused about this darn parentheses. There's nothing that I changed in this line. So why is it blaming me for that? Well, watch this. What's actually throwing it off is a few lines up where there's this, see this thing here? That's what's actually confusing it. And it didn't realize how confused it was. Of just how, it didn't realize, okay, it's in trouble until it got here. And it's saying, what the heck is this? I don't know what's going on. I'm all lost, etc. And you notice it didn't put us nicely back in the interface. It didn't put us nicely in the properties and let us see where this is. It just plopped us down. But with a bit of exploration, we may say, probably not too far from this first error message often is the problem. And if we're savvy, we'll say, oh yeah, wait a minute. That's something I typed, the space height. I don't recognize this other junk around it, but that's something I typed. This thing is something, where were those? Something to do with setting the X and Y locations associated with person, with a population rather. So let's go over here to population. I'll go poke around. Oh my gosh, there's a end curly here. I eliminate it, I save, I build, and things are copacetic. That is an example where you may see the Java code when you don't want to. But don't match its wig out with a wig out of your own. Don't engage in flailing behavior just because it's flailing. Try to poke around, particularly before that first error message, to see if you can see something that's throwing it off. And try to relate the little snippets you see to something that you did. Oh yeah, this is the code along that transition. Let me show you something that will help with that, okay? Maybe you're working with a model that you didn't create all the pieces of. Maybe it's a model that was created a long time ago by people now far away. Let me show you where you can track this down. This is one of the most powerful features of AnyLogic, and I typically forget to present it, or often forget in lectures. Ladies and gentlemen, I put this here. I'm going to save, and I'm going to build, and it will engage in its wig up. Right? Here we go. Now let's suppose that I were to click on this. This is all I get. I don't know where this problem is. I get here. I'm not sure what this is, but I recognize something about this. Let's suppose I see this space height. I want to see, where was this code? I can't remember where it is in my model. Select this. And then, ladies and gentlemen, one of your most powerful friends ends it. I believe this is a friend that Cheryl has long cultivated its acquaintance. Control F. This is find. I forget to talk about it, but it's singularly powerful. I want to find that thing in my model. I engage in finding behavior. Okay. Excuse me. This is a difference. Sorry. I want to do search and replace here. I want to search. So find is find in whatever thing here. I actually want to do search behavior off of edit, search. And so where did I go for that? I went over to here to edit, search, replace.
Control F works
if
Java's not open.
If Java's not open, yeah. I do search, and it will show me a couple places. But watch this. It's showing me this thing right now, but watch this. If I go down here, it'll show me within the model where this is, and it's showing me right there. Okay, let me double click this thing. Okay, it's a little bit finicky, but oh, come on. It'll actually bring me. Oh gosh, what is it?
The properties window one line is sticking like it just.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. Oh, I see. It's just up at the top here. I think it's just off the top. There it is. So this is the find results, the search results. By clicking on the most detailed one, it will bring you to that location in the code, or multiple locations that have this thing. Let me search for something that's at many locations. I'll get rid of this, and I'll search for. And I'll do it through the same interface to be sure. I'll search for uniform. That actually occurs at several places in the code. You'll notice here it occurs here for X, and it occurs for Y as well. Okay, so for both of these, it found it. Or maybe I want to say person in my model. I want to do search here, and it will find person at 4 different places in this sort of condition here for this statistic, but it also finds references over here in person, such as the name associated with this, and such as a thing associated with the presentation of this. Okay, so find is your friend, and sometimes if you don't remember where code is, you search for it and you can find it. Now, I'll tell you something that Matthew may recognize. Some others in the room might also know. This interface, if it looks familiar to people from computer science background, it's with good reason. This is what is called Eclipse. Okay? AnyLogic is built in Eclipse. This very, very, I don't know if it now still is, but at one time I think it was the most popular tool for building, amongst other things, Java code that there was. And it's still very popular. Many students in our classes use Eclipse to build software. AnyLogic is built inside of it and makes use of the facilities of Eclipse behind the scenes. So some of these tools that are revealed here, like search functionality, it's actually using what goes on in Eclipse. Winchell over there has found ways of harnessing Eclipse behind the scenes to do amazing things. One of the things you can do is you can connect to AnyLogic a debugger for this. He's actually figured out ways to bend it to his will in absolutely unbelievable fashions. Okay, but suffice it to say that this Eclipse platform has some very nice features in it that end up being leveraged by AnyLogic, including building, including navigating and searching, etc. Okay, so a few items along there. I said you can go to Control-J to go to certain places. It looks like this thing is not quite the right size, so I'm just going to make this full screen here. And we saw autocomplete. Sometimes with autocomplete, there are several items that match. And another thing you should know is that for each of these, you can get a description of what's going on if you're clever about manipulating it. So let's see if we can do this over here, okay? So let's suppose I didn't know what InState needs here. I could start to type in, and I can press this. And you'll notice when it pops up here, I'm using the arrow keys to go down one by one here. And here's InState. It provides me information. I can scroll down here to read sort of features of what it needs. So it's needing a state here to be passed into it, and it returns true if the state chart of the agent is in the specified state, okay? And so you give it a state to test if it's in, and it returns true if that particular state is currently active, okay? So it can give you information on what it needs to do its job and what it returns as a result of its job to you. That's all provided in this interface. And sometimes there's multiple things that are provided. Let's go up to uniform. Watch this. If we tried that with uniform, we'll actually see there's several. See it says ... That's an indication there's not just one, there's several here, okay, that have that name. Let's go explore that. See, it says there's several functions. Press enter or double click to see options. I'm going to press enter here. And now it tells me, okay, these are the ones. So there's uniform with nothing, where it gives you between 0 and 1, not including 1. Something where you just specified the maximum. I'm using the arrow keys to go down. Something where you say minimum. Something where you use a special random number generator, or you're just drawing from a special random number generator between 0 and 1. These are the different options. So where you see that dot dot, don't despair. Just realize you may need to dig a bit deeper as to which one you want, and you'll just select it, if needed, using the arrow keys, press enter, and then additional information is provided to you. Now, that's not the only way you can get information here, okay? The other way is, or another popular way, is by going up here to AnyLogic Help, okay? No. Mumble. Okay. So AnyLogic Help consists of a set of structured subsections. I don't tend to spend a huge amount of time here, but when I need it, I need it. All right, I like to poke there. Now, we can poke here in several ways. One is we can search here for something like InState, and it can provide us with some guides. That's really useful. In other cases, we may know which particular subsection, in which particular subsection we're interested. Okay, I'm exhibiting this function here. Mumble. There's a way to get it to go back to the, here we go. So you'll notice that some of these are focused on tutorials. Some are sort of just reference guides, which are more comprehensive things. Some high-level, frequently asked questions, etc. And some sort of more advanced modeling tools. There's a Java Basics here, which will have a direct relevance for our coming lectures within this bootcamp. But the library reference guides may also be useful because they provide more detailed understanding of particular libraries within this. There is also, and I'll have to find, right here. This, ladies and gentlemen, under this modest name, API reference, you will find a wealth of very precise information about the interfaces you can use in Java. It's under the name API reference. It stands for Application Programming Interface. That's what you'll so-called program against. That's the interface for you in your code to use. And there's sort of this welter of different things there. One of the most valuable ones is this one called Engine. And underneath Engine, you will find a whole wealth of information about different components of the model. Here's, for example, an event object. So there actually is an event object. What can you do with an event object? Oh, you can reset it. You can restart it. You can start it up. Essentially, you can ask it. You can stop it from going after it fires, and then you can restart it later. There's some other things you may recognize here. There's a thing called agent, as we'll talk about in future days. Person is an agent. It can do anything an agent can, plus more. Okay, anything that an agent must guarantee, person must guarantee. So here, an agent carries with it a set of basic functionality which person or any other agent, a dog, must be able to guarantee. So, for example, any agent can be asked to engage in certain types of behavior. We can ask for its name. We can ask it to jump to a certain place. We can get its full name. We can get its ID. We can get its length of it, latitude and longitude if it's in a GIS environment, etc. And associated with each of these, it provides information. Like this apply network, it recomputes the network. Say a new person has joined in the population. We apply the network. It's not the best thing to do. There's faster ways to do that, but sometimes we'll do it. And it tells us what goes on. It discards all connections and establishes a new connection. So this so-called API is something that I reference fairly often. But Christine is here to let us know that while the physical food has been served, it's followed by a much more important dessert, an intellectual dessert in the form of posters. And the posters are presently up.
They are up and they are out in the main area, and I'm herding students out as we speak. There is still pizza left and still some pop left and still some other junk food left. Anybody desperate for fruit, there's fruit left. And yeah, so please.
Thank you.
Give a second, roll around it.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we will adjourn for today, and we will continue next time with beginning our systematic journey through exploring certain Java concepts as they apply to AnyLogic. Those include things like classes, instances of classes, reference to those instances, expressions, statements, subclassing, the fact that a person is an agent and an agent is examples of higher level structures, and what that means in terms of your Java code. The next few days we'll be doing a whirlwind tour through these concepts, and we'll be giving some examples of code which make use of many of them, and perhaps some models which showcase some features like subclassing, which you might not otherwise encounter easily. Okay? So we'll see that in coming days. This has provided a brief glimpse of some resources, how to handle some errors. Tomorrow we begin a more systematic exploration. So thank you very much. We repair now to the posters. Okay? Okay, very good. Thank you.